Hello and welcome to this episode of Essex by the Sea. I'm Owen Ward, exploring the Essex coast, finding out about the amazing and interesting stories it has to offer. Don't forget to subscribe on your favourite podcast app, and if you like what you hear, tell your friends about Essex by the Sea as well. For this episode, I'm finding out about the large-scale arts festival called Estuary 2021, and I'm joined by one of the artists who is taking part. Tom King is a journalist, author, and I read semi-finalist in Mastermind, not just once but twice. Tom joins me for this episode, and we're down here at Coalhouse Fort in East Tilbury. Tom, thank you ever so much.
Oh, thanks very much for helping to get everybody to know about the festival, which is an amazing event. As you said, it's artistic, but it's also very much about getting out in the open and, in this case, exploring the Thames Estuary Trail, which almost like acknowledging walking as an art form, if we can call it that.
Yes, because the festival is taking on sort of a number of different ways. There's sort of art that is being done in the traditional sense, but then it's also, as you rightly say, about just getting out and exploring the estuary.
Well, one of the things I really love, one of the features, well, I would, is the range of installations which are going to be placed along the Thames Estuary Trail, which I first walked back in 2000, 21 years ago, and it's taken lines from the book. What it's bonded to is the book's humour. I mean, I set out to write it about walking the estuary, of course, but also do so in a fairly light-heartedly way. And the artist, the wonderful artist, Maria Amadou, has taken some of the jokes out of the book. And these have been printed out with a watercolour background and are now in vitreous enamel plaques, which are going to be placed at strategic points all around the 107-mile walk. So that's an example, really, as to how the various forms of activity and art that are going to be covered by the festival are sort of blending together. And this is going to be unique. The trail along the Thames is going to be unique in one sense. You know, other paths and trails have got stiles and kissing gates and things like that. This is going to have jokes. It's going to be paved with jokes. So hopefully there'll be a few giggles along the way as well.
And we should say, you've walked along the Thames and you've written a book about that journey, really, haven't you?
Well, the first edition of the book, Thames Estuary Trail, first came out in 2001, and I did the walk in 2000. And now a new edition is being commissioned by the Thames Estuary Growth Board through the two artistic bodies, Metal Southend and Cement Fields in Kent. So there's going to be a new edition brought out, but it's also, the walk itself has been extended. So the original walk going was 83 miles, starting at Foulness Island, working my way along the Essex shoreline, crossing by the Tilbury ferry, and then just sort of repeating it on the other side of the estuary, the other way round, working along the Kent shore to Warden Point on Sheppey Island, which at that stage, at that time, I sort of interpreted as the end of the Thames Estuary. Well, we've now redefined what we mean by the Thames Estuary, and the walk has been extended, so it's no longer 83 miles, it's now 107 miles, and it takes the path all the way along the North Kent shore to Margate and the North Foreland Lighthouse, which sort of marks the boundary between the Thames Estuary and the English Channel. And the new edition of the book is going to be launched on Southend Pier on May the 30th as part of the festival, with the extended chapters and a completely new design for the book. It's also accompanied by a wonderful map which sort of captures the humour of the book again. It's going to be actually the first time ever that sort of land map of the Thames Estuary is being published as a sort of separate entity. Obviously, you can see the Thames Estuary on maps and Ordnance Survey maps and that sort of thing, but this is the first map that's going to be actually devoted to the Thames Estuary, which is amazing, but it just shows really how neglected the Thames Estuary has been in the past. When I first walked it, it was still very much a sort of industrialised zone, and there were large sections of the shoreline I just couldn't get to. All that's transformed, and the new edition is partly about the transformation, the new life that has now come to the Thames Estuary on both sides.
Now, as I found out recording Essex by the Sea, and you know this by walking along the foreline and the shoreline of the estuary, it is so diverse, isn't it? It's a patchwork of different locations and places, really. Like this is wonderful countryside around this historic fort, but it's sort of peppered with history, and yet not a mile down the coast you've got industry at Tilbury Port and London Gateway in the opposite direction.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Owen, to stress that point. The most remarkable thing, and it was a real revelation to me when I did the original walk, and it still takes my breath away, what you can really describe as wilderness around the Thames Estuary. I mean, where we're standing now, we look across, we see to the Kent shore and the Kent hills. There's just a great swathe of empty countryside, woodlands, grazing country, and particularly marshland, almost unpeopled. And yet we're only, as the crow flies, about 20 miles from Piccadilly Circus. So we've got all that. There's these amazing great swathes of lonely countryside around the estuary. And as he also said, the towns and settlements are very diverse as well. So they range from the old seaside towns like Margate and Southend, which only really, they didn't exist except just sort of huddles of fishermen's cottages until they were developed as some of the most famous and characteristic English seaside resorts. And then you've got places like Tilbury and Thurrock, and Swanscombe on the other side, where the extraction industries are all important. And I've talked to old timers who sort of recall these areas as being cloaked in chalk dust. They had a colour of their own, which you just didn't see anywhere else. Well, now, of course, all the chalk pits are empty, and they've been turned into places like Bluewater and lakeside shopping centres. Then you've got all the fishing settlements as well. One of the characteristics of the Thames Estuary, which is not always recognised, is it's sort of the little creeks and inlets which pepper it all the way along, and make it a great yachtsman's area. And it's although the shipping the vast array of shipping which used to pass up and down the Thames Estuary is now just a memory, and it's all been reduced to a few huge container ships. The actual variety of craft out on the river has never been greater. And then, of course, the river itself is ever-changing. I talked to one chap who'd lived on the river for 50 years. And he had a balcony overlooking the estuary. And he never went abroad. He just loved it so much. He just stayed at home. And every day he came out, when he woke up, he went out on the balcony. He swore the estuary never looked the same from one day to the next. For over 50 years, he just had a different experience every day with the shifting mud and the sand and the light.
Do you think it's that diversity that helps make the estuary such a creative space? I've talked to people on previous episodes down at Southend about the sort of creative industries in Southend in particular. We've talked to an artist in Purfleet who has taken the inspiration of the river through the Thurrock area for their art. And certainly with the festival 2021, is it that mix that the estuary provides that helps with that creative?
I don't think you can ever quite put your finger on what sparks creativity on such a large scale, but I have no hesitation in saying I think the estuary itself is a big source of inspiration. I mean, all of us, everybody who's participating in the festival is inspired on one way or another by this huge body of water, this huge ever-changing body of water, and all of the history, and the things we've already talked about, the diversity of the communities. It all sort of mixes up into one really heady brew and just endlessly inspires people in all sorts of art forms. But we should also give credit to Metal and Cement Fields, who have been busy sponsoring, helping, encouraging artists of every description for quite a few years now. So it is a place where the future of the area is seen as being very much tied up with the creative industries. And you've got, for instance, High House in Purfleet, where the Royal Opera House has now shifted quite a large portion of its resources. And all of these help to coalesce the artistic activity, creative activity, and of course there's now enormous investment into new film studios. So it's going to be a big film and television hub, and so things build on each other. But there is just a heady atmosphere right now around the estuary. Everybody is, I think, quite sort of excited by what's in the air. Oh, and amongst the creative activities, of course, we shouldn't forget cooking and brewing and all that. I mean, some wonderful pubs and gastropubs and restaurants and just good old-fashioned cafes.
Yeah, you can't beat fish and chips perhaps down the Southend seafront, or perhaps a Rossi's ice cream as well. Yeah. Once I arrived here at Coalhouse Fort this morning, there was somebody who was walking their dog who just happened to stop by and say hello and said how lucky they felt to have a space like Coalhouse Fort here, which, as you rightly mentioned, we're not that far away from very large built-up cities. Centre of London's a stone's throw away, really, and yet we've got this green space. We can hear the birds in the background. Luckily, it's blue sky today, the sun's shining. It's a lovely place to be.
And the green spaces on the march as well. When I did the first walk in 2000, where we are now, or just before, was an area where I had to skirt right round it. I had to leave the edge of the river and head inland for a fair while. Now all that's transformed. The old muck pits, and it's not called mucking for nothing. Basically, particularly this side of the river, the Essex side of the river, was the dumping ground for London's waste. And when I did the original walk, it was still very much an active industrial site where the barges were calling every day and dumping London's stuff they didn't want on Essex. And now it's all been covered with topsoil. It's been turned into a nature reserve, and there's a path through it close to the river that you can do, which wasn't there before. So and there are others like it at the Van site. The Kent Shore is strewn with new nature reserves. The green spaces are not only present everywhere and a huge local amenity, but they're expanding all the time as well. And that's what I find wherever I go in Essex, but particularly along the estuary. So it is this wonderful green lung for, I think it's about 1.5 million people live within about 10 minutes access of the estuary. So it's a huge escape facility for them. And there's now this 107-mile trail alongside it, which allows you to roam and exercise and enjoy it close too. I laugh when people talk about who live in London or Essex, talk about heading off to the Peak District or the Scottish Highlands to trek trails when they've got this one bang on their doorstep.
I know, and it's kind of almost a hidden gem, which hopefully the festival is going to sort of expose more and highlight more, that it is somewhere that is right on our doorsteps here along the Thames Estuary. And I know you do sort of walking tours and take groups on a guided tour.
I'll be doing a few of those for the estuary. I don't do them on a systematic basis, but I do regularly get contacted by people wanting to walk particular spots, and I'd be particularly pleased to take part along the estuary trail and extend this whole process of just opening up awareness of the estuary, which is the core of the Essex Festival, which is going to go on long after the end of the festival in June.
The festival takes place from the 22nd of May. It runs for about a month, doesn't it? But actually, as you say, its legacy will go on much longer after that. How can people find out more information?
Well, the simplest way is just to go to the website, which is a very, very well-designed website, as you would expect from so many skilled artists and organisers as well. So you can find everything you need about the festival, and there are still new additions coming up all the time. So it's an active site, and it's worth keeping an eye out. But you can find everything you need to know about the features of the festival, the various items, the progress, and the people. There's a very good sort of biographical section about all the various artists who are taking part. So it's a superb site, and that's really just the best way of entering into it and finding out what's going on.
I'm going to put you on the spot now, finally, Tom. What's your best part of the estuary?
So as a good Essex lad, it pains me to say this, but my favourite is the point at Birchington in Kent, where you get hit by a great surprise. Suddenly, the White Cliffs begin, the chalk cliffs. Now, I always associate the White Cliffs with Dover, but in fact, it was a real discovery. They stretch much further back. And so suddenly you're walking along these flatlands and you suddenly find yourself standing bang underneath a big white cliff. It's one of those sort of dramatic changes in geology and place that take you by surprise, and it's a very good illustration of the sort of surprises which the trail's got for you all the way along. But I also love the wild places as well, and I've got a particular soft spot for Mucking Creek, which we're quite close to where we are standing now.
Tom, thank you very much for joining me on Essex by the Sea.
Thank you very much, Owen. And I hope lots of people will be able to enjoy the festival, because it is out of doors mostly, and so there are no COVID restrictions worth mentioning. You can enjoy it fully. All begins on the 22nd.
Don't forget to subscribe on your favourite podcast app and like and follow on social media. You can find out about Essex by the Sea on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter as well. So until next time, thanks very much for listening.